is our evaluation for killing time.
In what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products?
How did yours do it then, Hawley?
So, in order to create our own film noir project, it was very important that we needed to follow some certain aspects of film noir, such as like the lighting of locations, which was found in between like the first 10 seconds of my sequence, to make it recognisable with the film noir genre. In addition to this, I also used dark lighting and settings in my scenes, which is a frequently found setting in film noir films. Another convention I follow was the use of silhouettes and shadows. This is exemplified in my piece, where there's a silhouette of the mob boss walking into the bar, which is similar to The Exorcist and The Usual Suspects.
In my media product, I challenged and followed various forms and conventions of real film noir. When we were studying film noir, I looked at Pulp Fiction, Chinatown, Get Carter, Hostage, and a BBC documentary that refers to many older film noirs when I was analysing them. I developed the conventions of these film noirs and adapted them in my own way. The main conventions I looked at when I was studying film noirs were shadows, camera shots, lighting, violence, and use and effects of femme fatale and the opening credits. I've developed the lighting colour scheme to have a low-key, low-contrast lighting to give a mellow, subdued feel of neo-noir. I've also looked at violence and how it's portrayed in film noir. For example, Chinatown, which is conventional violence with multiple murders and guns and dark shadows, silhouettes and music and camera angles. Although violence is the main theme I'm looking at, it can be used in slightly different ways. Open violence, gun-blazing, fast-paced action scene, or the way we decided to use violence by having an underlining theme of violence in our scene. And our plot line is that the hitman will have to kill his own son. Whether the son and the father have a rocky relationship or even the son knows his father at all, this should send the world into anarchy and chaos. But this story is not explained, neither is it directly shown in our opening sequence. Although the boss tells the hitman to take him out, which is a call for violence. This shows that murder can be used in our film noir, which it should be because it's a very conventional feature of film noir, which has been set up in our opening sequence. But whether it happens to our audience is unclear, so we haven't directly shown any violence.
Yeah, something I used that was conventional, but not conventional to film noirs specifically, was we used to see the footsteps where our mob boss, Steve, was walking across the pavement, and we saw just a shot playing of the feet walking. And yeah, we saw that, and we kind of connected it with Kill Bill, and we realised that film used it as well. But the one thing that when we used it, which I think we all realised, that the dolly we used to move the camera was quite shaky on the road, which is something that if we were to probably do it again, maybe we use a different surface to bring the dolly along, something like that. Go on, John.
At the beginning of our, I think we all used it in our own edits, is that we had the sort of a dark rainy night, which is a very common theme within film noirs or neo-noirs or anything. It's also found in the neo-noir Eastern Promises, where it's literally the first scene is just a downpour of like a London street, and like that's pretty much the same as ours. So, yeah.
The music that I used in mine was dramatic suspense music, which is very conventional film noir, with violins, which are very good for setting a scene, and a steady beat, which speeds up over time as the opening progresses. This is a non-diegetic sound. However, in our opening we have various diegetic sounds, where the natural sound from the background chatter of the bar comes through into the filming, and the sound of cars on the roads you can also hear. No sound from myself was added in during the editing phase for diegetic sounds that the characters would be able to hear if the sound was there when the filming took place. But the background, we have the music. It's rainy, as Joe's already mentioned, which is very conventional. And we see an example of this in Eastern Promises. It's conventional because it represents the lives of all the people living in that area. It's dull, it's dark, and it's unfulfilling. Drinking in a bar, which is also something we added in, was very conventional film noir. We use this concept in our opening as you see the hitman sitting with a bottle of beer, sipping as he anxiously waits the arrival of the mob boss. We see an example of this in Get Carter, where a gentleman walks into a bar. There's a lot of background noise, as we had in ours, and he sits down and has a drink. This bar help represents my characters and how they compare on the screen to their surroundings. The hitman in a reasonably well-furnished pub looks run down, shabby and out of shape, far past its best, and due to slightly upscale-looking interior, looks the kind of establishment the mob boss would hold most of his meetings. And this would make him look powerful and in control, which is certainly what his character we want to portray to our audience. And we used a more modern bar than a dingy one because we tried to go for a slightly more neo-noir than an old-fashioned classic film noir, black and white.
Yeah, I think that was one of our main points during the planning, is that we wanted the sort of down-and-out main character that's like predominantly found in film noirs and like the agent boxer and the setup. So he's run down, he doesn't have much of a life to now live for. And so we sort of represented that in his mise-en-scène anyway, with the sort of scruffy how he's unshaven, like sort of the shirt and tucked and the tie down.
Yeah, so the costumes were quite conventional. Yeah, like despite the hitman, who usually the main character is quite a kind of well-dressed kind of guy. Apart from that though, the mob boss, he was dressed in a suit, which you kind of expect to see from characters of that type.
Did anybody manage to challenge any conventions? Because I know for all of ours, we didn't include a femme fatale kind of character. We didn't want any females in it. We just wanted it to be the mob boss and the hitman together and just speaking on their own.
Yeah, the femme fatale wasn't really needed in our opening because we weren't ruling out bringing one further on into the film if it were to continue, but for the opening sequence we didn't need to introduce one, because to introduce one it would have taken too much time to establish the relationship and how that femme fatale could come into the story, and that would have taken up too much of our opening, and we didn't need that. So we just focused on the mob boss and the hitman and establishing their relationship and how that would move forward.
So the femme fatale is usually very, very conventional, in film noirs and neo-noirs, in Double Indemnity, where the femme fatale is driven, the story is driven around the femme fatale and how she acts and reacts to the down-and-out main character.
I think something non-conventional about mine, I'm not sure about if it was the same in yours, was the music. I didn't use the conventional maybe jazz or piano you might hear in a bar, maybe in 1930s. I kind of used maybe not any more upbeat, but kind of it was more suspenseful to try and set the mood rather than a background track you might hear in a pub or in a bar of some kind.
In relation to talking about the mood and the tone, where we set the actual opening sequence was in a higher class bar, in contrast to kind of murky lower class bar that you'd find in a film noir, which is typically non-conventional.
Yeah, the bar in the film Get Carter, which you mentioned, is very murky, and the main character sits with the rest of them,
Yeah, and it's
whereas
run down.
whereas in ours, it's in a high class, but he's sat on his own, secluded from the people actually at the bar. He's on the table on his own.
Kind of shows the guy he is, I think.
Yeah,
It shows that he hasn't got a relationship with many people at all.
Stays in the outskirts because he doesn't want people to know completely.
To be judged.
How does your media product represent particular social groups?
Yeah, I think we've gone over a little bit in the last question, but we've got two kind of middle-aged, maybe 40s, experienced, worn-out men who've got no jobs. This isn't really... You'd think of people who are 40 years old to maybe have a job, maybe got their life all set.
Mid-career.
Yeah, mid-career. But the mob boss clearly has got business running, but the more run-down hitman clearly hasn't got as much power, and you can tell that by the way they're dressed. So I think that's a big thing.
I think when we represented them, we've kind of put forward two adults that chose a life of crime rather than an honest one.
Yeah.
The personalities are quite ruthless and demanding. They're quite strong people, and you can see that through their dress and their mannerisms, and in the conversation how they're speaking to each other. I represented them as quite cold and distant. As you can know, hitman went and sat away from any kind of other person in the bar. He sat by himself, and when he was waiting for the boss, he was sitting there drinking by himself, staring out the window, which is when our our production company name comes in, and it says in a moment of self-reflection. He's looking into the darkness, and it asks you questions, viewer questions of what is he thinking about, and where he is in his life. He's dressed quite rough, but on the other hand, the mob boss is quite hard and decisive, and the age and the presence of the mob boss is brought to life through the acting of the character. He uses quite stern facial expressions and is smart and well presented, and this is shown in his posture and his manner when he approaches the hitman.
I think the way that they're both dressed is a clear show of the status between the two. So that as the mob boss has his like tie up, is properly dressed, got his shirt tucked in. So he has like the most status in that scene, whereas the hitman, the ex-hitman, is like sort of shabby, like unshaven, shirt untucked, sort of like, so the status like is definitely with the mob boss, who has the more power, and it's shown in how he speaks as well. Like he speaks sort of down towards the hitman instead of
The minute
equal.
The minute the hitman got up, you could tell by his mise-en-scène that he was wasn't going to be the top dog as such. Like as soon as the mob boss walked in, you knew that the hitman would be underneath the mob boss, as just the way they're dressed more than anything. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I think obviously like you could tell like the hitman was of a middle class, but you'd think like just by looking at him that the actual mob boss was of high class, because he's wearing like a pinstripe suit, a done-up tie. He looks really smart in comparison to the hitman, who's just dresses scruffily with a loose tie and like wears an untucked shirt. But however, the working class is also represented through the use of the thug that we included in the toilets, where he meets the hitman and he engages in drug abuse and physical confrontation with the hitman.
Yeah, it sort of shows like sort of degenerate sort of like chavs, like that's also in the movie Plan B, where it's very underground, sort of not of high class at all, like so it's very low, like a lot of drug use in that film anyway.
I think when we were filming it, we tried to stress kind of the consequence of what living that life led to. Like through the hitman, you could see that he was at a point in his life where he had no direction, he hadn't achieved anything, and he's not somebody to be looked up to as an idol. Like he didn't have his life together at all. And the mob boss, although he was in a position of power, he was quite a mean person. Like he didn't. He's not somebody you want to know. He's not somebody you want to get along with. And we showed this by the close-up camera shots to and the facial expression, the emotion of the boss. There's one camera angle where it's facing right at the mob boss's face, as if you're looking through the hitman's eyes, and you can see his anger and the passion on his face, and it's not the face that you want to be looking at.
Kind of push you into the shoes of the hitman, doesn't it? About how you might think the hitman might feel in that kind of situation, and you know he curses a lot, swears when he's saying this. It's a close-up shot, and I think this kind of gives you the view about what it might be like to be a middle-aged man, maybe under the thumb of a boss. Give you an insight into like how they live, if they've got nothing to work towards, you know, they're down and run down, out on their luck.
Yeah, there was the one point when the hitman first came in and saw the mob boss sat at the table that he was sat at, and he sort of like did that, like sort of shows that he's inferior. He's like sort of almost scared of the boss.
Yeah.
So that like sort of instantly sets the scene.
Anything else?
Another class that we also challenged the race convention, which is commonly associated with film noir, which is where, I don't know if you've like studied old film noirs, but you seem to find only like white Caucasian like males in it, whereas in this one we used a black teenager for the drug abuser in the toilets, and then it just shows a physical confrontation, what he suggests or implies to his kind of class.